Have you ever wondered why some people walk into a room and suddenly the entire energy shifts? Why conversations bend around them? Why silence grows louder when they stop speaking? And why even the most confident voices feel strangely unsettled in their presence? These people are not loud. They don't need the spotlight. They don't demand attention. And yet, they hold a kind of gravity that pulls everything toward them. They are called empaths. But here's the truth no one tells you. The empath is not just the gentle, kind-hearted soul we've been conditioned to imagine. The empath carries a hidden force, one so powerful that even narcissists, those who thrive on control, attention, and domination, secretly fear it. This is not the story of sensitivity. This is the story of power disguised as weakness, of a hidden archetype that looks fragile on the surface but contains the ability to unravel illusions, break manipulations, and expose truths that others cannot face. For centuries, the empath has been misunderstood, seen as a victim, a people pleaser, a soft heart in a world of predators. But what if that was only half the truth? What if the empath's real journey is not about being consumed by the pain of others, but about awakening to their own darkness, their own shadow, their own unshakable strength? Because within every empath lies a paradox: the healer and the warrior, the nurturer and the destroyer, the one who absorbs the wounds of the world, and the one who has the power to end cycles of abuse forever. This is where the story changes. Because the empath who awakens is no longer a victim. They are no longer drained, silenced, or dominated. They rise, not by rejecting their sensitivity, but by embracing the shadow they once feared inside themselves. And when that happens, the narcissist's reign collapses. So the real question is this: are empaths truly the weak ones? Or are they the sleeping giants of human evolution? Beings whose silence hides a storm and whose compassion hides an unshakable power. Today, we are going to uncover that hidden truth. Empath's true burden and hidden power. An empath is not merely a sensitive soul who feels emotions more deeply than others. They are a vessel of unfiltered awareness, constantly absorbing the unseen layers of human experience. While most people only perceive words and gestures, the empath registers tone, silence, tension, and even the emotions others try desperately to hide. This is why they often feel overwhelmed. They are not just listening to one voice. They are carrying the weight of every unspoken truth in the room. The world mistakes this exhaustion for weakness, but in reality, it is the mark of an extraordinary strength. Empaths are living radars, decoding signals most people never even realize they are sending. The true burden of the empath lies in this constant awareness. Imagine being able to sense when someone is lying without proof, or feeling hostility in a smile that looks perfectly genuine. For the empath, this is not imagination, it is reality. Every encounter becomes layered, heavy, and complicated. They are forced to process not only their own emotions, but also the emotions of others that crash into them like waves. This can make them withdraw, seem shy, or appear fragile. But beneath that fragility lies a deeper truth. The empath's ability is a form of power so rare and so raw that it unsettles those who rely on deception and manipulation to maintain control. Because an empath cannot be fooled forever. They may doubt themselves, question their feelings, or silence their intuition out of fear of being too much. But eventually, their inner compass proves undeniable. They begin to see that what once felt like a curse is in fact their greatest gift, the ability to pierce illusions. A narcissist thrives on manipulation, controlling narratives and bending reality to their advantage. But the empath, with their relentless sensitivity, becomes the one person who can see through the game. And once the empath stops apologizing for their perception and begins trusting it, the power dynamic shifts dramatically. This is where the empath's hidden strength awakens. They no longer absorb every energy unconsciously. They begin to choose what to carry and what to reject. They establish boundaries, not as walls of fear, but as gates of discernment. They start to speak less, but when they do, their words land like lightning because they are rooted in undeniable truth. The empath who once appeared delicate now radiates an unshakable presence. Their silence becomes heavier than another's shouting. Their calmness unsettles the arrogant. Their authenticity dismantles illusions. This is the paradox of the empath. What looks like weakness on the surface is in fact a deep reservoir of power waiting to be claimed. The shadow concept: every human being carries a hidden side of themselves, a dimension of thoughts, impulses and desires they would rather deny or bury. This hidden self is what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not inherently evil, nor is it a monster lurking in the dark. It is simply the collection of traits we have disowned in order to survive, to be accepted, or to maintain the image we present to the world. Think of it as everything you were told was wrong about you. Your anger, your jealousy, your hunger for control, your need to be seen, your instinct to resist, or your desire to dominate. These rejected parts of the self do not disappear just because we hide them. They sink deeper into the unconscious, where they quietly influence our choices, shape our relationships, and demand expression in disguised forms. The narcissist is perhaps the clearest example of someone whose shadow has taken the driver's seat. All the things society frowns upon, arrogance, manipulation, entitlement, insatiable hunger for attention, are openly expressed in the narcissist's behavior. They embody the shadow without apology. This is why they often appear powerful, because they allow traits that others repress to dominate their identity. They exploit their own shadow instead of hiding it, yet this power is deceptive because it is built on imbalance. The narcissist becomes consumed by the shadow and loses connection to empathy, humility, and authenticity. On the opposite extreme stands the empath. Where the narcissist flaunts the shadow, the empath hides it almost completely. The empath's identity is built around light, gentleness, kindness, selflessness, and care. These qualities are genuine, but they are only half of the story. Beneath the empath's surface lies an entire universe of unexpressed shadow. Anger never voiced, boundaries never enforced, truths never spoken, and desires constantly sacrificed for the sake of harmony. Because the empath fears becoming what they hate, cold, selfish, controlling, they suppress these qualities so deeply that they begin to forget they even exist. They carry a mask of endless patience and compassion, but behind it is a fire they have refused to acknowledge. The danger here is not the shadow itself, but the denial of it. A shadow denied grows stronger in the dark. It leaks out in passive aggression, unexplained exhaustion, sudden bursts of rage, or relationships that repeat cycles of abuse. For the empath, ignoring the shadow means remaining trapped in an endless loop of giving too much, absorbing too much, and never standing fully in their own power. The secret to transformation lies in integration. The shadow is not an enemy but a teacher. By bringing those hidden qualities into awareness, by admitting, yes, I do have anger. Yes, I do want control at times. Yes, I am capable of selfishness, the empath becomes whole. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming cruel or arrogant. It means owning all parts of oneself so that they no longer control us unconsciously. When the empath learns this, they discover that their shadow is not a weakness but a source of strength. It gives them the fire to set boundaries, the courage to say no, and the authority to resist manipulation. The shadow, then, is not darkness to be feared. It is power waiting to be claimed. And the empath who dares to embrace it moves from fragility into wholeness, from silence into truth, from victim into awakened force. Empath's own facade. When we think of a facade, we usually imagine the narcissist, the grand performance, the inflated ego, the carefully crafted mask of superiority. But few realize that the empath also wears a mask, though of a very different kind. The empath's facade is not loud or arrogant. It is quiet, gentle, and selfless. On the surface, it looks pure, almost saint-like, endlessly patient, always giving, never demanding, eternally compassionate. People look at the empath and see a person who seems immune to anger, untouched by selfishness, incapable of cruelty. This is the role the empath unconsciously learns to play, often from childhood. But behind this mask lies a far more complex and unacknowledged truth. The empath's facade is born out of survival. Many empaths grew up in environments where their own needs were ignored, dismissed, or punished. They learned that love was conditional, that they would be accepted only if they were quiet, helpful, or pleasing. So they adapted. They built an identity around being the good one, the caretaker, the healer, the peacekeeper. Over time, this mask became second nature. The empath convinced themselves that selflessness was their true nature, that their gentleness was a sign of purity, that their worth depended on being endlessly available to others. In reality, this was a defense mechanism, a way to feel safe in a world where asserting themselves felt dangerous. But this mask comes at a cost, because behind it lies the empath's shadow. The anger they never express, the boundaries they never enforce, the voice they silence to avoid conflict. They may believe they are above negative emotions, but in truth, those emotions are simply buried, waiting to be acknowledged. The empath tells themselves they are being strong by staying calm, by absorbing more pain, by refusing to fight back. But this is not strength, it is suppression. And suppression eventually turns into exhaustion, resentment, or even self-destruction. The tragedy is that the empath begins to mistake the mask for their real self. They start to believe they are nothing but gentleness, nothing but sacrifice. But this is only half of their truth. A human being is not whole without both light and dark, compassion and boundaries, patience and power. By clinging to the facade of constant selflessness, the empath denies themselves access to their full potential. They live as a fraction of who they truly are. Yet the moment the empath begins to peel back this facade, something extraordinary happens. They realize that anger is not evil, it is fuel. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. Saying no is not rejection, it is self-respect. The mask of endless gentleness begins to crack, and what emerges is not a monster but a stronger, more authentic self. The empath discovers they can still be compassionate without being consumed, still be giving without being drained, still be kind without erasing themselves. The empath's facade was never weakness, but it was never the full truth either. By confronting it, they transform from a silent caretaker into an awakened force, someone whose compassion has depth, whose presence has authority, and whose soul finally belongs to themselves. Integration of shadow, real power. For most of human history, people have been taught to fear their own darkness. We are told to suppress anger, deny envy, hide our hunger for control, and bury any desire that doesn't fit the acceptable image of goodness. But the truth is, the parts of ourselves we fear the most are often the very sources of our power. This is the secret of the shadow. It is not the enemy, it is the unclaimed strength of the self. The empath, who has built their identity around light and compassion, discovers real transformation only when they stop running from their shadow and begin to integrate it. Integration means no longer pretending that the darker impulses don't exist. It means admitting, yes, I do feel anger. Yes, I do want boundaries. Yes, I do crave recognition. And yes, I do have the capacity to fight when I am wronged. These truths do not make a person evil. In fact, denying them makes them far more dangerous. A suppressed shadow leaks out in ways we cannot control. Sudden explosions of rage, passive-aggressive behavior, hidden resentment, or self-sabotage. By contrast, when the shadow is consciously acknowledged, it becomes fuel that can be channeled with clarity and purpose. For the empath, this process is life-changing. They spend much of their lives absorbing pain, avoiding conflict, and sacrificing their own needs for others. But once they begin integrating their shadow, they learn that their anger is not destructive, it is protective. It rises not to harm others, but to defend the self. They learn that boundaries are not selfish. They are sacred lines that preserve energy and dignity. They learn that saying no is not rejection, it is an affirmation of self-respect. With this integration, the empath shifts from being a sponge for the world's pain to being a guardian of their own power. And this is where true power is born. Because real strength is not about being endlessly good or endlessly tough. Real strength is about wholeness. A person who accepts only their light is incomplete. A person who accepts only their darkness is unbalanced. But the one who integrates both becomes unshakable. The empath who embraces their shadow is no longer easily manipulated, no longer drained by others, no longer trapped in cycles of sacrifice. They stand rooted, calm, and sovereign, compassionate when they choose, fierce when they must. This integration terrifies the narcissist. Why? Because the narcissist thrives on exploiting the empath's denial of their shadow. They rely on the empath's fear of conflict, their refusal to assert boundaries, their need to always appear good. But once the empath integrates their darkness, those weaknesses vanish. They can no longer be guilt-tripped, shamed, or dominated. Their energy is no longer scattered. It is focused. Their presence alone begins to dismantle the illusions of control around them. Integration of the shadow does not turn the empath into someone else. It reveals who they truly are, whole, balanced, and powerful beyond measure. This is the moment the empath stops surviving and starts living, not as a victim of their sensitivity, but as a master of their wholeness. Empath versus narcissist power shift. The relationship between an empath and a narcissist often begins like a scripted play. The narcissist, armed with charm and manipulation, steps onto the stage as the dominant force. They project confidence, demand attention, and weave illusions that captivate those around them. The empath, on the other hand, enters quietly, offering understanding, patience, and compassion. At first glance, it seems obvious who holds the power. The narcissist shines brightly while the empath absorbs silently. Yet this balance of power is not what it appears to be. What begins as domination inevitably transforms, because the very qualities the narcissist exploits are the same qualities that ultimately dismantle their control. A narcissist thrives on two things: illusion and energy. They manipulate stories to bend reality and feed off the emotional energy of those who believe them. The empath, being sensitive and compassionate, initially becomes the perfect target. They give endlessly excused behavior and absorb negativity without protest. To the narcissist, this feels like victory, but the empath's sensitivity is also their greatest weapon. While others are blinded by the narcissist's performance, the empath feels the inconsistencies, the hidden motives, the sharp edges behind the charm. They may not voice it immediately, but inside they know. This knowing plants the seed of resistance. As the empath awakens, the power dynamic begins to shift. The empath starts recognizing patterns of manipulation. They see how guilt, fear, and shame are being used as chains, and once they see it, they cannot unsee it. Slowly, they stop feeding the narcissist the energy they crave. They set boundaries where once there were none. They begin to say no, not with anger, but with calm certainty. For the narcissist, this is devastating. Their power only exists as long as others participate in their illusions. When the empath withdraws energy, the illusion cracks and the narcissist's authority collapses. This shift does not make the empath cruel or domineering. Instead, it restores balance. The empath realizes they do not need to choose between compassion and strength. They can embody both. They can still care deeply, but now with discernment. They can still offer love, but not at the expense of their own dignity. And with this shift, the empath no longer fears the narcissist. The roles reverse. It is the narcissist who becomes unsettled in the empath's presence. The calm gaze of someone who cannot be deceived is more threatening than confrontation. The silence of someone who no longer explains themselves is more powerful than arguments. The power shift is not about the empath defeating the narcissist. It is about the empath reclaiming themselves. When that happens, the narcissist loses their grip. Because in truth, the narcissist never had real power. They only borrowed it from the ones who believed their story. Once the empath awakens, that borrowed power is gone. And what remains is the undeniable truth. The empath was never weak. They were always the storm hidden inside silence, waiting to be unleashed. Wholeness in the journey of transformation. Wholeness is not about perfection. It is not about always being calm, always being loving, or always being in control. Wholeness is about integration. The acceptance of both light and dark, strength and vulnerability, compassion and anger. For the empath, this journey toward wholeness is the true transformation. They spend much of their lives living in fragments, identifying only with the good parts of themselves while hiding the rest. They see themselves as givers, healers, caretakers, but the truth is these are only pieces of a much larger self. The empath's journey is about gathering every fragment, even the ones they fear, and weaving them together into a complete and unbreakable whole. This process begins when the empath dares to face what they have suppressed. They confront the anger they were taught to deny, the boundaries they were afraid to set, the voice they silenced to keep the peace. At first, this feels terrifying. The empath has spent years believing that their worth comes from being endlessly patient and endlessly kind. To embrace anger feels dangerous. To say no feels selfish. But as they take these steps, they realize something profound. The shadow is not their enemy. It is their missing strength. The very qualities they rejected, assertiveness, resistance, self-protection, are the ones that complete them. Transformation is rarely sudden. It unfolds in layers like shedding skins of old conditioning. The empath learns that they can still love deeply while holding boundaries. They can still feel others' pain without carrying it as their own. They can still be kind without being consumed. Each realization pulls them closer to wholeness, closer to balance. They stop living as a half self defined by sacrifice and start living as a full self defined by authenticity. And with this wholeness comes a new kind of presence. The empath no longer seeks validation through giving too much. They no longer collapse under manipulation. They no longer confuse self-erasure with strength. Instead, they radiate a quiet power that others can feel instantly. It is the power of someone who is whole, someone who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Their compassion now carries weight. Their silence carries authority. And their very existence challenges the false power structures around them. The journey of wholeness is not just personal, it is also symbolic. When an empath integrates their shadow, they embody a truth that humanity itself needs. That true strength is not domination, but balance. That love without boundaries is weakness, and power without compassion is corruption. By becoming whole, the empath shows the world what real transformation looks like. They are no longer just healers of others, they are healers of themselves. And in that wholeness, they become living proof that light and darkness are not enemies, but partners in the making of a complete and powerful soul. Empath's awakening and self-respect. The moment of awakening for an empath is both quiet and revolutionary. It does not arrive like thunder, yet it changes everything. It begins with a simple realization: I matter too. For years, the empath has built their identity around the needs of others. They have given endlessly, tolerated silently, and endured pain while disguising it as strength. But awakening comes when the empath finally understands that self-sacrifice is not the same as love, and silence is not the same as peace. This awareness is the birth of self-respect, the cornerstone of transformation. Self-respect is not arrogance. It is not about looking down on others or demanding admiration. Self-respect is the unshakable knowing that your time, energy, and emotions are valuable, and therefore not everyone is entitled to them. For the empath, cultivating this respect requires unlearning a lifetime of conditioning. They must let go of the belief that kindness means endless availability, or that compassion requires self-erasure. They begin to see that true empathy includes empathy for the self. And once this shift happens, the entire structure of their relationships transforms. Awakening often reveals how deeply the empath's boundaries were violated in the past. They see how manipulators thrived on their silence, how narcissists exploited their giving nature, and how toxic environments fed on their compliance. This recognition can bring grief, even anger, but it also brings liberation. For the first time, the empath understands that the problem was never their sensitivity, but their lack of self-respect. With this new lens, they reclaim the power they unknowingly gave away. As self-respect grows, so does discernment. The empath learns to separate genuine connections from exploitative ones. They stop justifying harmful behavior with excuses like, "They're hurting, that's why they act this way." Instead, they hold people accountable, not with cruelty, but with clarity. They no longer absorb every storm. They choose when and where to stand strong. Their love becomes intentional, not automatic. Their compassion becomes powerful, not draining. This awakening is also visible to others. People who once controlled the empath now feel unsettled in their presence. The empath's quiet refusal to tolerate disrespect is more powerful than confrontation. Their silence now signals strength, not submission. Their presence alone communicates, "I see you, but I will not lose myself for you." For those who truly value them, this transformation deepens respect. For those who sought only to exploit them, it becomes a mirror they cannot bear to face. Ultimately, the empath's awakening is about alignment. They no longer live divided between who they are and who they are expected to be. They embody both sensitivity and strength, compassion and boundary, silence and power. And with this self-respect, they step into their true essence, not as a victim of their empathy, but as a master of it. The awakening does not end their journey. It begins it. Because now, for the first time, the empath walks as a whole, sovereign being, untouchable in dignity, unshakable in worth. The dangerous empath as a symbol of rebirth. The term dangerous empath may sound like a contradiction, but in truth, it represents the highest stage of the empath's evolution. An empath becomes dangerous not because they wish to harm others, but because they can no longer be controlled, silenced, or diminished. They embody a new kind of power, one born from surviving pain, reclaiming boundaries, and integrating every fragment of their being. In this stage, the empath is reborn, no longer chained to old wounds or conditioned roles. Their very existence becomes a symbol of rebirth, proof that suffering can forge strength and that sensitivity can evolve into an unshakable force. The dangerous empath does not fear their shadow. They have walked through it, faced the parts of themselves they once denied and found power there. This wholeness makes them unpredictable to those who once thrived on their compliance. The narcissist, the manipulator, the abuser, all rely on patterns of submission and silence. But the dangerous empath no longer plays that role. They will still love, but their love is not naive. They will still give, but their giving is not endless. They will still listen, but their silence is no longer weakness. It is choice. This rebirth transforms the empath into a mirror for the world around them. To those who carry truth and authenticity, they radiate comfort and healing. But to those who live in deception, control, or exploitation, they become unsettling, even threatening. The dangerous empath does not expose others with anger. They expose them with presence. Their calm detachment, their refusal to bend, and their unshakable self-respect create an atmosphere where lies crumble and masks fall away. In this sense, they are dangerous not because they destroy, but because they reveal. Rebirth also means stepping into purpose. The dangerous empath is no longer defined by survival. They are defined by creation. They use their deep sensitivity to guide, to heal, and to inspire, but they do so from a place of strength. They are not saviors. They are leaders of their own destiny. Their transformation becomes an archetype, a living reminder that pain can be alchemized into power, and that no one is destined to remain trapped in cycles of victimhood. On a symbolic level, the dangerous empath represents the rebirth humanity itself needs. In a world dominated by extremes, aggression without compassion or compassion without strength, the empath stands as the balance. They embody the union of both, showing that true power is not found in domination but in integration. Their journey proves that sensitivity is not a curse but an initiation. And when reborn, the empath becomes a force that not only heals themselves but also transforms the collective consciousness. The dangerous empath is not feared because they harm, but because they cannot be harmed in the old ways anymore. They have risen from ashes others thought would consume them, carrying both fire and water within. This is rebirth in its purest form. The evolution of the empath into a sovereign soul, untouchable, radiant, and unstoppable. Empath as a collective archetype for humanity's future. The empath's journey is not just personal, it is deeply symbolic of the path humanity itself must take in order to survive and evolve. For centuries, societies have glorified dominance, aggression, and control as measures of strength. Empires have been built on conquest, economies on exploitation, and relationships on power dynamics. Yet beneath the surface, this imbalance has created wounds so deep that they threaten the very survival of our world. In this context, the empath emerges as a collective archetype, a model for a new way of being that humanity desperately needs. The empath embodies connection. They feel the pain of others as their own, and in doing so remind us of our shared humanity. In a world fractured by division, this ability is no longer just a personal trait, it is a survival skill for the collective. If nations, leaders, and communities could develop even a fraction of the empath's sensitivity, decisions would no longer be made through greed or fear alone, but through awareness of their impact on others. This is why the empath, once dismissed as too sensitive, now represents the very qualities the future demands: compassion, balance, and integration. But the archetype of the empath is not limited to softness. As we have seen, the awakened empath embodies strength as well. Humanity's future cannot be built on compassion without boundaries, nor on strength without heart. Both extremes collapse under their own weight. The empath archetype shows us what balance looks like: strength infused with compassion, and compassion fortified by strength. This is not weakness, it is evolution. As a collective archetype, the empath also challenges systems of deception and manipulation. Just as the dangerous empath can see through the narcissist's games, collective empathy can pierce the illusions that fuel corruption, propaganda, and systemic abuse. It becomes harder for lies to thrive when sensitivity and awareness are valued. In this sense, the empath is not just a personal healer, but a societal disruptor, ushering in an age where truth and authenticity become the new foundation of power. The future archetype of the empath also redefines leadership. True leaders of tomorrow will not be those who dominate, but those who connect. They will not be feared for their cruelty, but respected for their integrity. And in this vision, the empath serves as the prototype of that leadership. One who listens, one who feels and one who acts with both courage and compassion. Ultimately, the empath as a collective archetype symbolizes hope. It shows us that humanity can move beyond cycles of exploitation and destruction into an era where connection, balance, and authenticity define progress. Just as the individual empath transforms through awakening and integration, so too can humanity. In embracing the empath's archetype, we find a path toward healing not just ourselves but the world. The empath is not merely an individual identity, it is the blueprint of the human future. The final evolution, the empath's legacy. The empath's journey does not end with personal healing, nor even with collective transformation. Its true culmination lies in legacy, the imprint left behind for future generations. Legacy is not just about memory, it is about influence, about shaping the path others will walk long after the empath is gone. In this final stage of evolution, the empath becomes more than an individual. They become a timeless force, an enduring symbol of what it means to live authentically, love fearlessly, and rise unbroken from the depths of pain. The legacy of the empath is not built through grand speeches or public recognition. It is built in quieter, deeper ways, through the lives they touch, the cycles they end, and the truths they embody. An empath who learns to set boundaries passes down a model of strength to others. An empath who heals their own wounds prevents those wounds from being repeated in their family line. An empath who awakens to their full power creates ripples of inspiration, showing others that sensitivity is not weakness, but an extraordinary form of resilience. In this way, their legacy becomes woven into the fabric of human progress. The final evolution of the empath also carries a spiritual dimension. They are not only survivors of personal trials, but carriers of wisdom that transcends their own lives. Their legacy reminds humanity that pain can be alchemized into growth, that compassion can exist without exploitation, and that true power comes not from domination but from integration. This wisdom endures long after the empath's physical presence fades. It becomes part of the collective consciousness, a guiding light for future seekers, dreamers, and healers. The dangerous empath, reborn and whole, also leaves behind a challenge. Their existence forces others to ask uncomfortable questions. What cycles are we continuing by staying silent? What parts of ourselves are we denying? What kind of world are we creating by glorifying dominance and dismissing sensitivity? In this way, the empath's legacy is not only inspiration but disruption, a wake-up call that demands reflection and change. At the heart of their legacy is a paradox. Empaths are remembered not for being invincible, but for being real. They teach us that strength can coexist with vulnerability, that silence can carry more weight than words, and that love is most powerful when rooted in self-respect. Their journey from shadow to wholeness becomes a living story that future generations can look to as proof that transformation is possible, even in the darkest of times. In the final evolution, the empath is no longer just an individual archetype, but a symbol of humanity's potential. Their legacy whispers across time. Sensitivity is not your weakness. It is your greatest strength. Guard it, honor it, and use it to create a world that remembers how to feel. This is the ultimate gift of the empath's legacy, not only surviving the world as it is, but reshaping the world as it could be. So now we stand at the edge of a realization that is bigger than one person, bigger than one story. It is the truth of what it means to be human. The empath's journey from silence to awakening, from fragmentation to wholeness, is not just about overcoming pain. It is about transformation. It is about reclaiming power that was always there, hidden beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and self-erasure. The dangerous empath is not a myth. It is not an exaggeration. It is the living proof that sensitivity, once seen as weakness, can evolve into the most unshakable form of strength. And here lies the challenge for every viewer. This is not just their story, it is yours too. Because within you, whether you call yourself an empath or not, lies the same choice. Remain asleep or awaken, remain fragmented or become whole, remain a reflection of others' expectations or become the author of your own legacy. The empath teaches us that power is not domination, it is presence. It is not found in how loudly you speak, but in the depth of your silence. It is not in how much you control, but in how much you embody truth. That is why the narcissist fears the empath, not because the empath fights louder, but because they stand stronger. And now the question turns to you. What will your legacy be? Will you continue the cycle of silence, of giving yourself away until nothing remains? Or will you embrace the paradox within you, the healer and the warrior, the shadow and the light, the softness and the fire, and step into your own rebirth? The world does not need more domination. It needs wholeness. It needs people who can feel deeply, stand firmly, and live authentically. People who cannot be bought, silenced, or broken. People like the awakened empath. Remember this: sensitivity is not your curse. It is your compass. It points you toward your truth, your power, your evolution. And when you embrace it fully, without shame, without fear, you do not just survive the world, you reshape it. The story of the empath ends here for now. But your story is still being written. The question is, how will you choose to live it?